On July 17, 2018, Staff Sergeant Marcus Raymond Johnson, 32, returned to his hometown of Houston, Texas, after completing his third tour of duty in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Johnson, who had enlisted in the United States Army at age 23, was honorably discharged following a roadside bomb incident that left him with a shrapnel wound to his left shoulder and severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Johnson's homecoming was documented in photographs taken at George Bush Intercontinental Airport, where he was greeted by his wife, Shanice Elaine Johnson, née Williams, 29, a registered nurse at Memorial Hermann Southwest Hospital. The couple had been married for 6 years prior to Marcus's final deployment. The Johnsons resided in a modest home in the Westchase district of Houston, purchased with Marcus's military housing allowance in 2015. According to neighbors interviewed during the subsequent investigation, the couple was quiet but friendly, occasionally participating in community gatherings and homeowner association meetings. Medical records obtained from the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Houston confirmed that Marcus Johnson was diagnosed with severe PTSD, characterized by recurring nightmares, hypervigilance, and occasional dissociative episodes. Between July and September 2018, Johnson attended weekly therapy sessions and was prescribed sertraline and prazosin to manage his symptoms. Colleagues at Memorial Hermann later testified that Shanice frequently researched PTSD treatment protocols during her breaks and implemented various coping strategies at home to assist her husband's readjustment to civilian life. On the evening of October 3, 2018, Shanice Johnson was working a standard 12-hour shift at Memorial Hermann when she stepped outside to the hospital's east parking structure for a cigarette break at approximately 10:17 p.m. According to the case files, it was during this break that Shanice inadvertently witnessed an interaction between 3 Houston Police Department officers in the far corner of the parking structure. These officers were later identified as Sergeant Robert Benson, 41, a 15-year veteran of the force, Officer Michael Harris, 35, who had served for 8 years, and Officer Thomas Coleman, 29, who had joined the department 4 years prior. All 3 were assigned to the Narcotics Division of the Southwest Precinct. Cell phone data retrieved during the investigation confirmed that Shanice recorded a 3-minute, 42-second video from her position behind a concrete pillar. The video, later recovered from her cloud storage account, clearly showed the officers dividing what appeared to be prohibited substances and discussing their ongoing scheme to extort protection money from drug dealers operating in the 5th Ward and Gulfton neighborhoods. Officer Benson could be heard explicitly mentioning their plans to squeeze another 10 grand from a dealer identified only as Martinez in the coming week. Text messages sent from Shanice's phone to her friend and fellow nurse, Amelia Porter, at 10:43 p.m. expressed her shock and indecision about what to do with the information. In her final message to Porter, time-stamped at 11:02 p.m., Shanice wrote, "I think I need to report this. These guys are supposed to be protecting us." Internet search history from Shanice's laptop showed that she visited the Houston Police Department's Internal Affairs Division website at 11:17 p.m. and downloaded the department's whistleblower complaint form. At 11:23 p.m., she placed a call to the IAD hotline, which lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. During this call, according to the IAD operator's testimony, Shanice arranged to meet with Lieutenant Diana Rodriguez of the Internal Affairs Division the following morning at 9 a.m. At 11:46 p.m., Shanice called Marcus from her personal cell phone. Phone records indicate this call lasted only 58 seconds. According to Marcus Johnson's statement, his wife told him she would be working late due to an emergency room influx and not to wait up for her. This was the last communication between the couple. Shanice Johnson never returned home. At 6:17 a.m. on October 4, 2018, Marcus Johnson was awakened by persistent doorbell ringing at his Westchase district home. Houston Police Department officers Kevin Wright and Danielle Torres delivered the news that Shanice Johnson's body had been discovered at 4:43 a.m. in an abandoned warehouse in Houston's 2nd Ward, approximately 9.7 miles from Memorial Hermann Southwest Hospital. According to the initial police report filed by Detective Philip Michaels of the Homicide Division, Shanice Johnson was found with 13 grams of prohibited substances. The official statement claimed she had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the chest during what appeared to be a drug transaction gone wrong. The medical examiner, Dr. Vanessa Liu, documented in her report that the time of death was estimated between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. on October 4th. Johnson vehemently rejected this explanation during his initial interview with detectives Michaels and Ramirez. His statement, recorded and transcribed in the case files, emphasized that Shanice had no history of drug use, maintained a spotless professional record, and had undergone routine drug screening at Memorial Hermann as recently as September 27, 2018, with negative results. Hospital Administrator Gregory Palmer confirmed to investigators that Shanice had clocked out of her shift at 11:32 p.m. on October 3, approximately 4 hours before her estimated time of death. Security footage showed her walking toward the east parking structure, but her vehicle, a 2016 Honda Civic, remained in the hospital parking lot until it was impounded by police on October 5. Shanice Johnson's funeral was held on October 9, 2018, at Grace Community Baptist Church in Houston's 3rd Ward. The service was attended by 147 people, including 34 staff members from Memorial Hermann Southwest Hospital, several veterans from Marcus's former unit, and Shanice's family members who traveled from her hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. During the graveside service at Houston Memorial Gardens, Marcus Johnson observed 3 men standing approximately 50 yards away, partially obscured by a large oak tree. Through photographs taken by mourners and later analyzed during the investigation, these men were identified as Sergeant Benson, Officer Harris, and Officer Coleman. According to statements from 4 separate funeral attendees, the officers appeared to be watching the proceedings while maintaining radio contact with someone. When approached by Shanice's cousin, DeAndre Williams, the 3 men quickly departed in an unmarked police vehicle. Upon returning home from the funeral, Marcus Johnson discovered Shanice's secondary cell phone concealed in a hollowed-out book on their bedroom bookshelf. This Samsung Galaxy S8, purchased by Shanice in August 2018 according to T-Mobile records, was not listed in the inventory of Shanice's personal effects collected at the crime scene. The phone was password protected, but Marcus correctly guessed the combination, their wedding anniversary, 0524, on his 3rd attempt. The phone contained the 3-minute, 42-second video recorded in the hospital parking structure, showing Benson, Harris, and Coleman dividing what appeared to be prohibited substances and discussing their extortion scheme. Additionally, the phone held screenshots of text messages between the officers detailing payment amounts from various dealers in Houston's 5th Ward and Gulfton neighborhoods, dated between June and September 2018. Most significantly, the phone contained a calendar entry for 9 a.m. on October 4, 2018, marked IAD-LT. Rodriguez, whistleblower. A draft email addressed to Lieutenant Diana Rodriguez of the Internal Affairs Division included an attached video file, and the message: "I witnessed these officers engaged in illegal activity. I fear for my safety but cannot remain silent. Please advise on next steps and protection options." Phone records indicated that Lieutenant Rodriguez had called Shanice at 8:43 a.m. on October 4, approximately 5 hours after her estimated time of death. In her subsequent statement to investigators, Rodriguez confirmed that Shanice had scheduled a meeting but never arrived, and attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. By October 14, 2018, the Houston Police Department's investigation into Shanice Johnson's death was proceeding along a single track. Detective Philip Michaels submitted preliminary findings suggesting Shanice had been involved in drug activity. Toxicology reports revealed trace amounts of prohibited substances in her system, though these findings were later disputed by independent toxicologist Dr. Eleanor Vance, who noted the amounts were consistent with environmental exposure rather than recreational use. Marcus Johnson began conducting his own investigation on October 15, drawing on skills acquired during his military service with the 5th Special Forces Group. According to receipts and online orders later found in his home, Johnson purchased $4,327 worth of surveillance equipment from 3 different suppliers between October 15 to 17, including directional microphones, miniature cameras, GPS trackers, and a modified police scanner capable of monitoring Houston PD radio frequencies. Johnson's military colleague, Raymond Ray Thompson, later testified that he assisted Johnson by providing access to specialized equipment, including thermal imaging devices and encrypted communication tools. Thompson, a former Army Ranger who served with Johnson in Kandahar in 2016, was employed by Sentinel Security Services in Houston at the time. Between October 18 and November 2, Johnson systematically tracked the movements of Sergeant Benson, Officer Harris, and Officer Coleman. His meticulously organized notes, later recovered from a fireproof safe in his garage, documented 37 instances where the officers met with known drug dealers in Houston's 5th Ward, 3rd Ward, and Gulfton neighborhoods. Johnson photographed 14 apparent transactions and recorded conversations, indicating the officers weren't merely taking bribes, but actively controlling distribution territories and setting prices for prohibited substances throughout southwest Houston. Johnson's notes indicated that the 3 officers had divided Houston into operational zones. Benson controlled 5th Ward, Harris managed Gulfton, and Coleman oversaw 3rd Ward operations. Their network reportedly generated between $50,000 and $75,000 weekly, with approximately 40% being funneled through legitimate businesses, including Coastal Breeze Car Wash on Westheimer Road, owned by Benson's brother-in-law, Derek Martinez. On November 5, 2018, while Officer Michael Harris attended a mandatory training session at the Southwest Precinct, Johnson gained access to Harris's apartment at the Westbury Complex on Chimney Rock Road. According to Johnson's detailed logs, he installed 3 wireless microphones and a miniature camera in the living room, connecting them to a recording device concealed in the apartment's HVAC vent. During his search of the apartment, Johnson discovered a diamond stud earring inside a small wooden box on Harris's nightstand. This earring was later confirmed by 3 separate sources to match one Shanice Johnson had been wearing on October 3, 2018, as documented in hospital security footage from her final shift. The most significant evidence emerged on November 8, when Johnson's devices recorded a 27-minute conversation between Harris and Coleman in Harris's apartment. The transcript, later entered into evidence, revealed critical information about Shanice's fate. Harris expressed concern about a missing phone that Benson was inquiring about, while Coleman admitted they had thoroughly searched the warehouse but couldn't find it. They discussed the video Shanice had recorded and how it could end their careers. Coleman acknowledged he had struck Shanice harder than intended during their interrogation, implying her death was unintentional. Harris mentioned that the investigation was concluding successfully, with Detective Michaels accepting their fabricated drug deal narrative and planted evidence. On November 11, 2018, Detective Michaels officially classified Shanice Johnson's death as a drug-related homicide by unknown assailants, citing substantial evidence of her involvement in narcotic distribution. The case was designated inactive pending new evidence and transferred to the department's cold case division. Desperate to expose the truth, Marcus Johnson contacted Lieutenant James Parker of the Internal Affairs Division on November 13. Lieutenant Parker, a 22-year veteran of the force known for his anti-corruption stance, agreed to meet Johnson at a coffee shop in River Oaks rather than at police headquarters. During this 2-hour meeting, Johnson presented the surveillance evidence, including the recording from Harris's apartment and Shanice's phone containing the original video. Lieutenant Parker took possession of the evidence and, according to the barista who served them, informed Johnson that the situation was more serious than anticipated, and he would need 48 hours to properly secure the evidence and involve trustworthy colleagues. At 6:14 a.m. on November 15, 2018, Lieutenant James Parker was found dead in his vehicle in the parking garage of his apartment complex in Memorial City. The official report concluded he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The service weapon recovered at the scene contained only his fingerprints, and a handwritten note found in his jacket pocket indicated he found his burden too heavy to bear and expressed regret. None of the evidence Johnson had provided to Parker was ever recovered. Following Lieutenant Parker's death on November 15, 2018, Marcus Johnson's trust in the justice system completely collapsed. Phone records show he placed 17 calls to various law enforcement agencies between November 16 to 19, including the Houston Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, the Harris County District Attorney's Office, and the FBI's Houston Field Office. According to statements later provided by these agencies, Johnson was directed to submit his evidence through official channels, but he refused, citing concerns about corruption within the department. On November 21, 2018, Johnson contacted Raymond Thompson, his former squad mate from Afghanistan, now employed as a security consultant with Sentinel Security Services. Financial records indicate Johnson withdrew $43,000 from his joint savings account with Shanice and transferred it to Thompson's offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Thompson later testified that Johnson had requested his assistance in acquiring untraceable equipment for what Johnson described as a personal security operation. Between November 23 to 27, Thompson procured several items for Johnson, including a Glock 19 handgun with a sound suppressor, a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle with scope, 4 prepaid cellular phones, a tactical vest, night vision goggles, and $15,000 in cash. These items were exchanged in the parking lot of the Galleria Mall in Houston, as documented by mall security cameras that captured the two men meeting briefly at 9:43 p.m. on November 27. Johnson began surveillance of Officer Thomas Coleman on November 29, 2018. Credit card records show Coleman frequented Sharks Billiards on Washington Avenue every Thursday evening. On December 6, 2018, Coleman spent 4 hours at the establishment, meeting with 3 individuals later identified as known drug distributors in the 3rd Ward area. Johnson monitored these interactions from his vehicle parked across the street, documenting Coleman's movements with a telephoto lens camera found later in Johnson's home. At 11:37 p.m., Coleman left the billiard hall alone and drove to his residence, a 1-bedroom apartment in the Heights district of Houston. Traffic cameras captured Johnson's vehicle, following Coleman's at a distance of approximately 3 blocks. Coleman arrived at his apartment building at 11:52 p.m. and entered his ground-floor unit. According to the forensic reconstruction conducted by the Houston Police Department, Johnson gained entry to Coleman's apartment at approximately 12:17 a.m. on December 7, 2018, using a bump key on the rear entrance. Coleman, who had been watching television in his living room, was confronted by Johnson wielding the suppressed Glock 19. Crime scene investigators later determined that Johnson bound Coleman to a dining chair using zip ties, based on abrasions found on Coleman's wrists and ankles. A digital voice recorder discovered in Johnson's possession during his eventual arrest contained a 47-minute audio file, time-stamped 12:23 a.m. to 1:10 a.m. on December 7th. The recording captured Coleman's full confession regarding Shanice Johnson's death. In this confession, Coleman admitted that he, Harris, and Benson had observed Shanice recording their drug transaction in the hospital parking structure on October 3rd. They tracked her movements using police resources and intercepted her as she walked to her vehicle after her shift. Coleman confessed that they transported Shanice to the abandoned warehouse, where they interrogated her for approximately 3 hours regarding who else had seen the video and whether she had already contacted Internal Affairs. According to Coleman's recorded statement, Shanice refused to cooperate and maintained that she had already secured the video evidence in multiple locations. In the most significant portion of the confession, Coleman acknowledged that he struck Shanice repeatedly during the interrogation, eventually hitting her with sufficient force to cause her to fall backward and strike her head against a concrete pillar. This impact, according to Coleman, resulted in her immediate death. Coleman further admitted that he, Harris, and Benson then staged the scene to appear as a drug deal gone wrong, placing prohibited substances on her person that had been confiscated in previous arrests. The medical examiner's supplemental report, filed on January 14, 2019, confirmed that Shanice Johnson's autopsy showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her head, consistent with Coleman's description, though this had been initially attributed to the circumstances of the alleged prohibited substances deal confrontation. At 1:12 a.m. on December 7, 2018, neighbors in Coleman's apartment complex reported hearing what sounded like a muffled gunshot. Officer Thomas Coleman was discovered by his patrol partner, who came to check on him after he failed to report for duty, at 7:43 a.m. Coleman had been shot once in the forehead at close range. The murder weapon was not recovered at the scene. Officer Thomas Coleman's murder on December 7, 2018, triggered a Level 1 mobilization of the Houston Police Department. Chief Michael Reynolds established a special task force comprising 27 officers from homicide, internal affairs, and tactical operations. Road checkpoints were established throughout the Heights district, and all off-duty officers were recalled to active service. Despite this massive response, investigators initially had no suspects or leads regarding the perpetrator. Detective Sergeant William Norton, the lead investigator assigned to Coleman's case, noted in his report that the crime scene exhibited tactical precision and methodical execution, suggesting military training. Ballistic analysis determined the bullet recovered from Coleman's skull was a 9mm hollow point, consistent with ammunition used by numerous civilian and law enforcement firearms. Officer Michael Harris, upon learning of Coleman's death at 8:17 a.m. on December 7th, immediately requested emergency leave from his commanding officer, citing a family emergency in Dallas. Cell tower data later showed Harris never traveled north toward Dallas, but instead headed southwest on Highway 59 toward Victoria, Texas. At 10:03 a.m., Harris used his credit card to purchase fuel at the Valero station on Highway 59 in Rosenberg, approximately 35 miles southwest of Houston. Marcus Johnson, having anticipated Harris might flee, had placed a GPS tracker on Harris's personal vehicle 3 days prior. Johnson's journal, recovered from his home during the subsequent investigation, detailed his pursuit of Harris along Highway 59. At 10:07 a.m., Johnson confronted Harris at the Valero station, disabling Harris's vehicle by puncturing the rear tires while Harris was inside the convenience store. When Harris emerged and discovered his disabled vehicle, Johnson approached him from behind and forced him at gunpoint into Johnson's vehicle. A witness, station attendant Manny Delgado, later described seeing a man matching Harris's description, leaving with another individual, but failed to recognize the situation as an abduction. Johnson drove Harris back to Houston, specifically to the abandoned warehouse at 2201 Commerce Street, the same location where Shanice Johnson's body had been discovered 2 months earlier. GPS data from Johnson's phone confirmed his arrival at the warehouse at 11:36 a.m. A second audio recording recovered from Johnson's digital recorder documented a 38-minute interrogation of Harris. In this recording, Harris revealed critical information about Shanice's abduction and murder. According to Harris's forced confession, he had been monitoring the hospital's security feeds on October 3rd as part of their regular surveillance of potential drug distribution sites when he observed Shanice recording their meeting. Harris admitted he made the decision to intercept her and was the one who suggested they eliminate the threat permanently after their interrogation proved unsuccessful. Harris further confessed that following Shanice's death, he personally contacted Detective Philip Michaels, with whom he had a long-standing arrangement, to ensure the investigation would be directed away from the officers. Harris admitted to providing Michaels with $25,000 in cash to classify the case as drug-related and to expedite its closure. At 12:42 p.m., the recording captured the sound of a single gunshot. Harris's body was discovered by a homeless individual at 3:17 p.m. The medical examiner determined Harris died from a single gunshot wound to the chest, which punctured his heart and caused immediate death. The crime scene analysis noted several anomalies that appeared deliberately staged. Most significantly, a burner phone was found in Harris's jacket pocket, containing text messages ostensibly sent between Harris and Sergeant Robert Benson. These messages implicated Benson in ordering Harris to eliminate Johnson before he causes more problems, and referenced taking care of C the same way we handled his wife. Forensic analysis later determined these messages had been sent that morning, despite Harris having no contact with Benson that day. Sergeant Robert Benson was placed on administrative leave pending investigation on December 8, 2018. His service weapon was confiscated, and he was interviewed for 7 hours by Internal Affairs. During this interview, Benson vehemently denied any involvement in either Coleman's or Harris's deaths and suggested they were being targeted by drug gangs related to recent arrests. On December 10th, Benson contacted Jeffrey Campos, a former police officer dismissed from the force in 2015 for excessive force, who had since worked as a private security contractor. Phone records show 7 calls between Benson and Campos between December 10th to 12th. Campos later testified that Benson offered him $50,000 to locate and neutralize Marcus Johnson, whom Benson identified as the likely killer of his colleagues. Unbeknownst to Benson, Campos had previously served with Raymond Thompson in private security operations. Campos contacted Thompson on December 12th, who then alerted Johnson to the contract placed on his life. Johnson, Thompson, and Campos developed a plan to use this opportunity to draw Benson out. On December 14, 2018, Campos informed Benson he had located Johnson and would need Benson's assistance to finish the job. They arranged to meet at an industrial storage facility in Pasadena at 9:30 p.m. Audio and video recordings made by Johnson documented the entire meeting, during which Benson explicitly admitted orchestrating the cover-up of Shanice's murder, including personally planting the drugs on her body and creating the false narrative about her involvement in drug trafficking. On November 17, 2019, at 6:37 a.m., the body of Captain Robert Benson was discovered by security guard Gerald Wilson in the parking lot behind the abandoned Westside storage facility on Fannin Street in Houston. The evidence package was addressed to FBI Special Agent Dominic Ramirez, bypassing the Houston Police Department entirely. By 10 a.m., the FBI had established a joint task force with the Texas Rangers to investigate corruption within the Houston Police Department. By nightfall, the investigation had expanded to include Commissioner Thomas Reeves and 5 deputy commissioners. On November 18, 2019, at 8:15 a.m., Marcus Johnson walked into the FBI field office in Houston and surrendered. According to Agent Ramirez's report, Johnson appeared calm and composed. "I'm Marcus Johnson. I killed Officers Coleman Harris and Captain Benson. I've come to face justice," he stated to the receptionist before being taken into custody. The trial of Marcus Johnson began on February 12, 2020, at the Harris County Criminal Court. Despite multiple offers of legal representation, including pro bono services from prominent criminal defense attorney Eleanor Whitman, Johnson insisted on representing himself. He refused to enter a plea bargain, despite prosecutors offering to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for information about potential accomplices. During his opening statement, Johnson addressed the jury directly. "What you will hear in this courtroom isn't the story of a vigilante. It's the story of a husband who found the system designed to protect us was corrupt to its core. When that system failed my wife, it failed all of us." On March 17, 2020, Johnson delivered his closing statement to the court. Court transcripts record his final appeal to the jury. "I don't stand before you seeking forgiveness or mercy. I knew the consequences when I decided to take action. What I did was wrong in the eyes of the law, but Shanice deserved justice, and I gave it to her in the only way left available to me. The system you represent failed her. It failed us all." After deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury found Marcus Johnson guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. On March 19, 2020, Judge Elaine Montoya sentenced Johnson to death by lethal injection. When asked if he had any final words before sentencing, Johnson stated, "I don't regret what I did. Justice had to prevail, even if the system failed. Shanice deserved justice, and I gave it to her in the only way possible." On May 3, 2020, Commissioner Dawson visited Johnson at the Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, where death row inmates are housed. According to prison records, their meeting lasted 73 minutes. In an interview following the visit, Dawson stated, "I told Mr. Johnson that his wife's death would not be in vain. The department has instituted reforms to ensure this level of corruption can never again take root. While I cannot condone his actions, I understand the desperation that drove them." As of October 2024, Marcus Johnson remains on death row. His case has been appealed twice, with both appeals denied by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. A final appeal is pending before the United States Supreme Court, though legal experts consider the likelihood of the court hearing the case to be minimal. Johnson's execution date has not yet been scheduled.